from Ashley Banfield, who is uncovering even more information about Lori Vallow-Daybell tonight. Let's bring Ashley in as we begin this discussion. Unreal. We're doing it every night, Ashley. And tonight, another sibling of Lori Vallow-Daybell is no longer with us and died years ago.
Yep. So this is, if you're joining us all week, you're thinking we're repeating the story. We are not. This is the second dead sister we have found this week. The first sister we found, her name was Stacy Lynn Cope. We showed you her grave. She was it was 22 years ago that she died as a diabetic. But there's another sister. There you go. You can see the gravestone. And actually, that's a new picture that we have, because that had been covered in mud and had been overgrown. No one had looked after that grave. And so the groundskeepers were so kind, and they went out and they cleaned it off, polished it up, and took a picture of it for us. So there's another sister, Vinny, shock, and her name right there, Laura Lee Cox. That is her obituary. Let me tell you a little bit about her real quickly. She was 6 weeks old when she died. The obituary said she died August 5th, 1971. She was the daughter of Barry and Janice Cox, and the surviving siblings at the time were listed as Adam, Alex, Stacy, and that's it. So clearly, Laura Lee was baby number 4, and Summer and Lori were babies 5 and 6. So out of 6 children, Vinny, the count now is down to 3 that are alive. But really, such a sad little story. We don't know how she died at 6 weeks old, but it sort of dovetails into the other breaking news that we told you off the top, and I do have more after this as well, and that is about Alex, because Alex, as it turns out, the brother of Lori, who shot her husband dead, shot Charles Vallow dead. Police said they believed that it was self-defense. Now they're not so sure. They're reopening that investigation, and Alex himself ended up dead. But that 22 years ago, when Stacy, his sister, was sick with diabetes, he was looking after her. And I have a family source that's told me he was looking after his diabetic sister in San Antonio when she died, and that at that time he got in a fair bit of trouble for maxing up her credit cards. It was unclear as to whether it was right around the time of the death or if it was before the death or whatever it was, but the exact quote was, got into some trouble. And then the other quote from a family member by marriage was that when they met Alex Cox, something just did not feel right about him. That's a quote. Something just didn't feel right about Alex Cox. And now Alex Cox is dead. So 3 siblings dead. Here's the other breaking news I wanted to bring you, Vinny, and I hope you're sitting down because this stuff doesn't write itself. The surviving brother, out of the 6 children, there is a surviving brother named Adam Cox. You've heard of him, right, Vinny?
Yeah, well, and I know Adam Cox, I didn't realize was someone that I had reported on years ago when I guess he was a radio DJ. And we're looking at those pictures now because he had his 15 minutes of infamy a few years ago. And that was a story that I remember covering on Court TV radio on Sirius XM.
Yep. And so what's super interesting about Adam is that when he was a DJ, at a radio station called KDND FM in Sacramento, he and his fellow colleagues in the DJ booth decided, they were going to have a contest. The radio station held this contest, and it was a really embarrassing name, but I'll just tell you, it was Hold Your Wee for a Wee. The idea here is that you had to drink a whole bunch of bottles of water if you were one of the contestants, and the last one who could stand it without going to the bathroom would win a Sony console, that gaming console, the Wii. So one of the participants was a 28-year-old mother of 3 named Jennifer Strange, and she was holding a bottle after bottle after bottle and died. I mean, she died. She did not win the contest. She was the second runner-up. She got concert tickets, according to some reporting out there, but she died. That we know for sure. And what's fascinating here is that not only did this death make national headlines, but Adam himself wrote in his book that he was investigated criminally. There were no charges ever levied against Adam or the other 9 employees or the other DJs, but there was a pretty sizable lawsuit. I'll get to that in a minute. But first, I think you should hear this excerpt of an interview that he gave to KCRA about the aftermath of all of this. Have a look at Adam Cox.
I really don't think that we did anything wrong. We just did our jobs. I feel horrible for her and her family.
What would you say to the family of Jennifer Strange?
I'm sorry, man. I know what it's like to have a kid. I have a kid. Never thought for 1 second that we were going to get fired. Not for 1 second did I think that we were going to get fired.
And why not?
Because it wasn't our fault. We didn't do anything wrong. We just did what we were told to do.
Well, despite that, he was named in a massive, massive wrongful death lawsuit. And he wasn't the only one. The others involved, the fired employees, the station, the owners of the station. It was a huge lawsuit, and the plaintiffs prevailed. $16.5 million at the time, Vinny. That was one of the largest wrongful death awards in the state of California. To that end, he wrote this book self-published, called My Crazy Radio Life. And I want to read an excerpt from it because it is very, very telling. He says, I was out of work and my DJ reputation had been scorched. I was blackballed from the radio industry. I was making big money in the radio. Then suddenly, because of a mistake by a radio station, which made us the scapegoat, I was broke. I had no immediate future in the radio broadcasting industry. I called everyone I knew in the radio business and many stations asking for employment as a radio host. And here's the key line. But nobody was going to hire a DJ with a reputation as a killer. Ouch. Now, that's the kind of line, the circumstance his sister finds herself in right now. He probably wish he didn't write because, technically, is he a killer? Is he not a killer? I think he called himself a killer in that description, but he was involved in that death of that 28-year-old mother of three, Jennifer Strange. And guess what, Vinny?
And I remember covering that story.
Oh, yeah? No, tell me.
Yeah, well, when we were covering that story, we were covering it from all the different angles, and it was on Court TV radio at the time, so we were doing radio, and we're like, wow, it looks like there's going to be a criminal investigation into the DJs here, and then a little bit of reflection, and a lot of times those contests are controlled by the promotions department, and as the person on the air, you're the face or the voice of it. So we looked at it, and then putting two and two together today, that's pretty wild. The thing about Adam Cox is has he been vocal about this case, about what's happening with his sister? Because he's a guy who is in our business and has been a broadcaster and a personality. I would think he would be either jumping on the opportunity to be the family spokesman or just running away from it.
So we got an answer, and that was no comment. I understand. Listen, if you're a family member of somebody involved in something like this is a really tough row to hoe. And so no comment from Adam. But there you go. So a wrongful death in his past. And then guess what? There is yet another dead person directly connected to Lori Vallow-Daybell. And it is one of her attorneys, her bankruptcy attorney, whom she retained, a man by the name of Gray Jolink. He was retained by her back on August 30th of 2005. And at 61, he passed away. I will say this was less than about 3 years after she retained him. I spoke with Gray's family today. Delightful, delightful people, really. Just couldn't be nicer. And they were very helpful. And I should just say Gray had his own private practice. And after 10 years, the documents, were shredded, all of his personal documents. So unfortunately, they couldn't go back to find out if there was something, untowards or interesting about Lori's particular case with them. But they did say they did not suspect any foul play with Mr. Jolink. They were very specific to me that there was no investigation and they were away for the weekend with him. It was a family getaway weekend, and Lori was nowhere to be found. So if anybody's out there, was suspicious that Lori might have had something to do with it, he died from an aortic aneurysm, and he'd been with the family for several days without anybody else around him. So don't get on the dark web and start thinking that there's a conspiracy there. The Jolinks are really, like I said, very, very delightful people. But one more person in her past, her bankruptcy attorney, who's no longer with us.
Yeah, well, and I'm glad that you were able to speak with the family because, a little piece of information like that turns into something completely different. And while the world of Lori Vallow-Daybell is very complicated, and filled with death. There, certain things you got to separate: directly connected, directly in orbit versus things that are unrelated. So great clarity.
A lot of that, you know
I
what,
know
Vinny?
everyone.
A lot of it comes from Facebook and Facebook groups. They are fascinated with this case. In fact, they've been asking me questions, and a lot of them, throw these nuggets that are just sort of the dark web rumors. And so that's why it's really important to call family members or call people directly connected and get some resolution and clarity. And that's what we did. But are you ready for some Facebook questions, my friend?
I can handle. I'm ready.
Okay, here we go. Marie asks this. Rexburg, Idaho is in charge of the investigation of the kids. Would she be extradited to Arizona if she's charged as an accessory to Charles' murder? Would all the cases be combined into one? I think that's such a great question because, Vinny, we've covered cases before that have had different jurisdictions and different cases in the same defendant. And so sometimes it's very complicated. But what would be your best answer for Marie?
I think what would happen is the jurisdictions would coordinate with one another. It's not going to be combined into one case, different jurisdictions, different charges. So they're all going to be separated. Idaho charges, Arizona charges, all separated. And you're seeing this with the R. Kelly case right now, right? He's got state charges in Illinois, federal in Illinois, and in two different federal cases in New York, all separate cases, but the prosecutors and judges all sort of coordinating the calendar of things. Sometimes there's a fight, like we want the defendant first. Yeah. So Idaho has first dibs because you have control of her. You get first dibs. But that's something that could be coordinated amongst the parties. So we'll see how all that develops. But right now, the Idaho case, I mean, things are happening.
Yeah, it's interesting because in Harvey Weinstein's case, cases in California, cases in New York, and that was kept separate. In Jeffrey Epstein's, the feds and the state got together and did that sweetheart deal, which nobody liked. But that's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. But then to Marie's point also, if Chad's involved, oftentimes we see that cases are severed and these defendants don't actually sit together at defense table. Their cases are severed. So it remains, all of this is sort of way out over our skis. But Debbie Day asks, if Lori gets out on bail, which we now know isn't going to happen anytime soon, could she then be arrested for another charge, assisting a murder, and put back in jail? Is there any information on the autopsies? Did you look into the death of Lori's accountant? So I think all of those questions in one. I think maybe it meant Lori's bankruptcy attorney, but I think it is interesting about another charge, another bail, and other hearings. So how do you work that when she's already being held, no bail given today? If a murder charge comes down or something else, then what happens? Are there additional bail hearings that really don't matter anyway?
Well, here's what happens. Each judge can set bail in their own case for their own trial. So let's say she gets involved in an indictment for murder, and that might be a case where there's no bail. So even if she posted the $1 million to get out of Idaho, but another jurisdiction or another judge has said you're in on murder on a no bail case, then there'll be a detainer on you and you won't actually be released. It's actually pretty common for criminals to have more than one set of charges in different jurisdictions, and it's an everyday occurrence in courtrooms. But sometimes when someone makes bail in one jurisdiction, there's a detainer from another that will keep you held, and then you'll be moved to that other jurisdiction. So great questions, by the way. Every night, great questions.
They're so
Ashley,
good. They're so good. The Facebook followers are really loving you and the show, and they're loving this particular story, and they are fascinated.
As we all are. Ashley Banfield, thank you so much.